Since the very first World Cup in 1930, only countries from two continents have ever won the World Cup, that being South America and Europe. Europe have won 12 World Cups, while South America have won 9. This statistic can be extended further as no team from outside of these two continents has ever reached a World Cup final, meaning all 42 squads in the final have involved exclusively Europe and South America. This has created somewhat of a natural rivalry between these two footballing continents, and the World Cup, starting this week in Qatar, will continue this saga. And so today, we'll discuss the history of this rivalry as well as some predicted outcomes for the 2022 World Cup, and most importantly, is Europe or South America gonna win this year? So buckle in, as we're going to fly through the history of this rivalry that's lasted nearly a century, and you can expect some turbulence. So where do we begin? Well, I'm going to start by giving a quick mention to what was the biggest competition for football prior to the success of the World Cup. Ever since 1896, the Olympics had already been handing out medals for football, and the earliest World Cups were also regarded as less meaningful than the Olympics. The reason the World Cup started in the first place was because in the 1932 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, they did not plan to have football as it was not as popular in the US. And so, the World Cup was born. The concept was initiated by co-founder of FIFA, Jules Rimet, and the trophy would also be named after him. The first World Cup would then be hosted in 1930 in the two-time Olympic gold medalist country and perhaps the strongest team at the time, Uruguay, which subsequently went on to win their first World Cup in 1930. The next World Cup would start some controversy between South America and Europe, with the reigning champions boycotting the 1934 edition, which would be hosted in then fascist Italy under the rule of Mussolini. Uruguay boycotted the cup for a few reasons, one of them being that when they hosted, only 4 European nations agreed to make the trip, and they would also boycott the World Cup in 1938. It was safe to say from this point onward the World Cup became quite a bit more important, and football started to become a sport that a certain nation really started to identify with, that being Brazil, which would put up a great third place performance in 1938 and would make a bid to host the World Cup in 1950 after the Second World War. In 1950, the World Cup returned to South America, being hosted in Brazil. In preparation for the tournament, Brazil built one of the most famous stadiums in this sport, the Estádio Jornalista Malha Filho, most commonly referred to as the Maracanã, which would host the biggest final in terms of attendance ever, with 173,850 people in attendance for the Brazil-Uruguay final in 1950. This was a historical final, which Brazil painstakingly lost. This event even caused Brazil to change their white and blue jerseys into the famous yellow ones. This loss, paired with Brazil's exit in the quarterfinal in the following 1954 World Cup to Hungary, featuring the legendary Puskás, was breaking Brazil's spirit, but little did they know that these events was motivating a young boy to change their fate. Up until this point, South America had won 2 World Cups and Europe had won 3, with home advantage being a big factor as the host continent was winning the cup, and the next cup would be held in Sweden, upsetting the South Americans yet again. In 1958, however, things would change, and it was truly a year that would define the future of the sport. Brazil was at odds with itself. Its unique style, the Ginga style that incorporated capoeira into football, o jogo bonito, was not working for Brazil in the past 2 World Cups. So Brazil had hired a new manager that would bring European tactics, discipline, and structure to the game, Feola, and they had gone a 3-month tactical tour in Europe prior to the cup. 3 months later, and they were still struggling with the new 4-2-4 system, and the Ginga style and the modern tactics were clashing, despite them winning still pretty much every game. And it was the 4th match against Wales, where the youngest player in the World Cup ever at that point, and now legend Pelé, would become an instant star, scoring the game-winning goal. Brazil went on to win the final against Sweden with a unique mix of tactics and style. This victory made a lot of records that still stand to this day. For example, most goals in a final, with the match being 5-2, but more importantly, it was the first and only time a non-European team would win in a European-hosted World Cup. It was actually a moment of unity, with Sweden being respectful and honored by playing this Brazil team, and in return, Brazil ran around the stadium with the Swedish flag. This first World Cup victory started Brazil's golden age with Pelé, and another notable star that's often overlooked alongside Pelé is Garrincha. So why so much talk about Brazil? Well, they're South America's most successful nation. They would go on to win in Chile in 1962 with Pelé involved, although injured early, and then they took a break in Europe as England won its own World Cup in 1966. And then to round off their golden age, in 1970 in Mexico, with Pelé involved again, Brazil won once again. Brazil had now beaten 3 European teams in the final in the span of 4 World Cups, but it would be a long time before they see a World Cup final again following Pelé's retirement, falling into a heavily structured and tactical system that Brazilians were not a fan of. After the 1970 World Cup, Europe had won 4 and South America had won 5, and the pattern of the host continent winning was still consistent outside of Brazil's victory in Sweden. While Brazil didn't see a World Cup final for a long period, it would be Argentina to carry the South American baton in the World Cup, and the final in Argentina in 1978 was between Argentina and the Netherlands. Argentina would go on to win their very first World Cup, which would start their golden age, and a history of rivalry between them and a certain European country, which we'll get to soon. 1982 was the year that many remember fondly, with a surprise winner and exciting games, but for South America, this was a year that many want to forget, especially for Socrates, star Brazil player. Brazil went into this World Cup reinvigorated, with their team being compared to their team in 1970. And even better, Argentina, defending World Cup champions, were defeating this Brazil team in pre-World Cup matches. Argentina and Brazil both progressed from the first group stage into the second, which was the format at the time with 24 teams. The group was Italy, Brazil, and Argentina. Italy was not expected to get out of this group, and perhaps they shouldn't have, but they defied all odds. They defeated Argentina first in a shocking win, and Brazil too went on to beat Argentina, and by the way, this was the legend's Maradona's first World Cup. The game between Italy and Brazil in 1982 was to decide which team would proceed, and it would go down in history as one of the best games ever. Paolo Rossi, Italy's striker up until this point, had not scored a single goal in this tournament, but against Brazil, he came alive. He scored 2 goals, and Brazil scored 2 as well, one through the previously mentioned Socrates, and this score was sufficient for Brazil to advance. But then, in typical Brazilian style at the time, they had to go for the win, and that's when Rossi struck. He scored the game-winning goal and completed his hat-trick and would go on to win the whole cup with Italy, scraping up every award, and Italy won against all odds. Many years later, Socrates would say in an interview, "We had a hell of a team and we played with happiness. Then Rossi had 3 touches and scored a hat-trick. Football as we know it died on that day." Going through the years, it seems that this loss might have rattled Brazil to its core. They became more in line with the European style over the years, which perhaps also came naturally as more and more of their players started playing in European clubs. The next 2 finals I'm going to pair together, 1986 and 1990. Both years were a final between Argentina, and I would argue their kryptonite in the World Cup in the past 32 years. 1986 in Mexico is remembered mostly through the performances of one man, Diego Maradona. It was a real one-man show, with him famously dribbling past the entirety of the English squad and scoring, voted as the goal of the century. His second goal that game is also famous, the Hand of God goal. In that 1986 tournament, it would be Argentina winning against Germany in the final. And 1986 is actually the first and last time Argentina beat Germany in the World Cup, and unluckily for Argentina, they met a few more times since. 4 years later, in 1990, this time in Europe, Germany-Argentina would have a rematch in the final, and this time Germany won with great players such as Jürgen Klinsmann and Rudi Völler. 1994, the World Cup in USA, Brazil would have its return to form and defeat Italy, but o jogo bonito, or the beautiful game, had been diluted, and winning in the form of a penalty shootout left Brazil feeling less special and different from their former identity. The next 2 World Cups that followed featured Brazil in the final with 2 European superpowers, France and Germany, 1 win and 1 defeat. As history has shown us, they won on the non-European ground in 2002, and they lost in Europe in 1998 against Zidane, a French legend, and his teammates. So now the tally stood 9 wins for South America and 8 for Europe, and the rivalry was fiercer than ever, with that 2002 Brazil team breathing hints of their former selves. Players like Ronaldinho were bringing back the Ginga style, and the team was functioning like the dynamic Socrates era with quick passing, but this time they had a lethal striker in the form of R9 Ronaldo. However, especially in recent years, winning the World Cup comes with a change in mentality for players. They become negatively impacted in the next World Cup. I talk about this in more detail in my World Cup curse video on the channel, but in 2006 in Germany, the South American teams did not perform. It was a European fest, much like the one in 1982, and the theme of Europe being dominant would only continue. Italy defeated France in the final in 2006 with the likes of Buffon and Pirlo, and Spain won against the Netherlands in 2010 with their phenomenal trio in midfield. After the retirement of Ronaldo and Ronaldinho, Brazil would take a back foot, but Argentina would once again take the baton, and the next South American generational great would show his class starting at the World Cup in 2006, but only in 2014 did he come to his peak with the national team. We're of course talking about Messi. In 2006, Messi and Argentina would be eliminated by Germany, and then once again in 2010, they were defeated by Germany. Ever since their win in '86, they have been stopped by Germany time and time again. 2014 to me was the year where this rivalry could be felt with more emotion than ever. The host nation for the first time in 36 years would be a South American one, and Brazil would host their second ever World Cup after the one in 1950. Tournaments hosted in South America were a good omen for the South American teams, as the winner of every World Cup on the continent was South American thus far. The tournament was progressing marvelously for neutrals, with the semifinals being Brazil, Germany, and Argentina, Netherlands. Argentina successfully made it to the finals with their hero Messi, and Brazil would face one of its darkest matches in its history, in their own home. They lost to Germany 7-1, with the stadium in Belo Horizonte dripping with tears and sadness. It was a real wake-up call and a moment of terror for Brazil. The final was South America's Argentina and Europe's Germany, a tense and close game which ended with European victory. Germany had done in 2014 what Brazil did in 1958 against Sweden. It had come full circle. The most recent World Cup in 2018 in Russia, France won the World Cup and no South American team even made it past the quarterfinals. And so now we stand with South America having won 9 World Cups, with Europe having won 12 World Cups, winning 5 of the last 6 in convincing fashion. Now, in 2022, the World Cup will be hosted in Qatar, and in a week the tournament will start, on neutral grounds. Both Argentina and Brazil are amongst the favorites, and I truly believe it can make for an incredible tournament and a meaningful showdown between South America and Europe. What an exciting time to be a football fan. Which leads me into what exactly we can expect from this rivalry in 2022, as well as some of the matchups and potential finals to look forward to in this World Cup. I've spoken in a recent video about Messi and Ronaldo and how this will be their last World Cup, and how if both of their teams progress convincingly, they could be in the final. Now, wouldn't that be one crazy match for the continental rivalry? Portugal versus Argentina. But of course, that's just one of the many scenarios that could happen. Taking a deeper look, there are 13 European teams and 4 South American teams. There is at least 1 European team in each group, and the South American teams are spread out in different groups. When it comes to the South American teams this year, there is belief predominantly in Brazil and Argentina, followed by Uruguay, with Ecuador garnering little belief from odds makers. According to the experts, the South American sides that are predicted to make it out of the groups are Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. In the next stage of the tournament, it seems likely that Brazil will meet Uruguay and Argentina will meet either Denmark or France. If Brazil and Argentina find success there, Brazil could face potentially Belgium, the team that eliminated them last time, and Argentina could face the informed side, the Netherlands. If Argentina and Brazil can overcome those difficult obstacles, then they will meet in the semi-finals for that South American spot in the finals, most likely against a European side like France, Portugal, or England. So in this tournament, if things go as expected, which by the way they never do, then we are looking at 2 South American sides warring their way to the final, also needing to defeat each other in the process. And then we potentially have a South American team against the European side in the final on a neutral ground. Glorious. Will it be a European or South American side winning this year, or neither? Well, I'll leave that up to you. Let me know.